Hello beautiful souls, welcome to another video. Welcome to Therapy Thursday. This part of the week is going to be focused on different topics about healing. I will be speaking from my own personal experience some of the time with, for example, today's video is going to be about healing my mother wound part 2 because I have already done a video on this channel where I referenced a meditation that I did and it felt very healing, but something else has come up and I'll be talking about that in just a second. Other videos on Thursdays might also include just tarot readings about healing, anything that kind of inspires healing. I do plan on having shadow work readings on Saturdays, so that in and of itself is kind of already healing videos or healing topics, specifically targeting shadows and more negative like parts of ourselves, darker parts of ourselves. But on Thursdays I think I will also have healing kind of oracle cards or readings integrated in between to kind of balance out. So yeah, let's get into it. So how did I heal my mother wound even more? So I find it very interesting because healing is such a continuous process. There have been many times in the past few months where I've been like, you know what, I am totally and 100% healed from XYZ. You know, this doesn't trigger me anymore. I don't think about it anymore. I don't talk about it anymore. Therefore, I am healed. You know, nothing is going to hinder me from moving forward from this, etc., etc. And lo and behold, a few months later or several, you know, there were times where just these intense emotions, these intense feelings, you know, getting triggered by certain things, getting triggered by, for example, on Instagram, seeing these amazing, beautiful mothers who are being different from the past generation, who are treating their children differently. And I didn't think that that would trigger me. It doesn't trigger me. I'm like very proud of them. I'm very like amazed that that is a new thing that's happening where people are more in tune with their children's emotions, because our generation has been so traumatized that we are very intentional about not passing that on to our children. And I absolutely love that. But in its own way, it did trigger me, even though I was like, yes, you know, I'm grateful that so many people are doing this. You know, there would be videos where other people are talking about things they've heard from their parents or things that have been spoken to them or taught to them and all these things. And that in itself would trigger me because I'd also gone through those things, or I'd also been told those things. And it was like, or I would see the people who are treating their children really well, and or see people with really great relationships with their mothers, and for me it would be like, why can't I have that? Why couldn't I have that? Like, why is our life so twisted up that we can't have that, you know? And so I would find myself being triggered, especially in any conversation with close friends, talking about my mom, talking about my experience. It would get very heated for me very quickly. And it would be really frustrating because it would be like, sorry, I'm trying to regulate the lighting here. It's a little bit changing. But it would get really heated for me to talk about my mom. It would be really difficult for me to talk about her in any way that didn't bring me frustration. And that wasn't always the case. So previously, when I was still living with my parents, I think that I wasn't quite aware of how negative the experiences that I was facing were. I would basically thought it was normal. I thought that it was a usual thing for the way that I was being treated. And it wasn't until I started talking to other people about certain things that maybe I didn't like, or just talking in general, and they would just be like, girl, that is that is not okay. And it took a long time for me to even admit that, oh my God, this is not a great environment for me. Oh my God, like I'm actually a lot more angry and resentful than I think I am. Oh my God, like I would kind of try to make myself think that I loved my mom unconditionally. And in reality, I had a lot of resentment towards her. I had a lot of pain and, you know, unspoken words that never came out of my mouth towards her that I wish I could have said. And, you know, last year, 2023, was actually, I stumbled upon a video on YouTube about the traits of narcissistic mothers, and I listened to it, and at the end of it, I was just crying because it was truth. Like, every aspect. Now, obviously, if someone has narcissistic traits, it doesn't mean they're a narcissist, okay? But, you know, each and every one of those points felt very, very true. And it, like, broke my heart because it was like, oh my God, that is my reality. And then coming to terms with that in and of itself was just like, you know, so, but in its own way, it was heartbreaking for me, right? So, fast forward to now, I don't speak to my mom, I don't speak to my stepfather, I don't speak to my family whatsoever, particularly because of our final conversation. There is a beautiful moth that landed right outside my window just now, particularly because of our last conversation where, you know, things were being spoken, but I can only describe this as like spirit guides or intuition, but you know, speaking to my parents in any capacity is always super emotional because it brings up a lot of trauma. And I found that when I was at home and we would have discussions, I would just start crying like spontaneously. And they were thinking that it was coming from a manipulative place, when in reality, it was all the emotions that I'd bottled up over years that didn't have anywhere to go, that I couldn't regulate, that every time I was in close proximity with them or had to talk with them besides anything like surface level, it just felt very uncomfortable for me. So my body would be responding with tears, with, you know, I didn't realize how much trauma I held up in my body until I had finally moved out. And like a month later was my stepsister's birthday, and I was coming home, going there to bring my gift and hang out with my sisters. And in my car, right before I had to go out, I was here was somewhere for years I had been parking here or going to this house, right? And I had such an intense panic attack, which is not normal for me. I was trembling so badly. I was just shaking, and it was just like the most uncomfortable thing for me ever. And then I had to go inside, and it was worse. I lasted about an hour before, you know, my sisters were getting tired. They're toddlers, by the way. They're like much younger than me, but they were getting tired, and I just like took that as an out. I was like, I'm out of here. So all this energy has been building up, and when I left New Jersey, I was like, you know what? You know, it's over. That's part of my life is done. And yet, here it still creeps up on me, coming up out into my life every once in a while. Now, coming to the closing of the story, I have done meditation practices where it like the Our Sacred Universe, which is hosted by Maria, she has a meditation about healing the mother wound, or I think it's parental wound, and you can use it for mothers or fathers. And I took it several months ago. I did it several months ago, and it was very emotional for me. You know, it felt like a lot of healing had come through with that. However, and then it kind of like settled and rested, and I was like, okay, I'm healed from this. It doesn't bother me anymore. And fast forward a few more months, I had this book of poetry that I wrote, or I started writing, called Therapy Session Unspoken Words. And if you guys would like, I might share some poems on this channel for Therapy Thursdays. But I had a lot of poems, and reading them because they were written in that space of brokenness and pain, triggered all those emotions all over, right? And this past month, I was writing in them all over again, typing up more poems, and more things were coming up for me. And I was at the point all right, welcome back. I had to switch positions because I wanted the light from the sun, but it was overheating my phone. So back to what I was saying. I was basically saying I was ready to publish this book, not in a sense of retaliation or retribution. You know, part of me was considering using another name, even though I have really no connection to my family in terms of family name or anything like that. And I don't think anyone really recognized who I was in terms of my family members, because they had their own last name. I had a different last name. I looked different from kind of both of them. So, but yeah, I was coming to the point where I was thinking of publishing the book pretty much for other people who had gone through something similar or, you know, could relate to it, right? But even throughout that process, there was a part of me that was like a little bit like, what if my parents see it, or what if my family sees it, or, you know, what if someone who happens to know of all of us together reads it and tells them, or, you know, basically I was scared of retribution or retaliation. And also in another part of it, I didn't want to make my mom into the bad guy, because, you know, I will always have this sense of empathy of realizing that she had to learn a lot of things on her own. She had to do a lot of things on her own. But I don't know. I was just like, okay, well, I've put all this effort into this book. I want to publish it. I want to put it out there into the world, whether it's under a pseudonym or whatever. I just want to publish it. And on the night, one night as I was reading through it, kind of like the night before I was ready to publish it, I was reading through it, proofreading, editing, all that stuff, and it's like the universe just like put up a mirror to me as I was reading stuff. I was getting more ideas of poems and stuff, and the ideas for poems and the words that were coming up, which that's how a lot of things flow for me when it comes to writing. I get the idea, I get the title, or I get like a line, and it kind of just flows from there. And even as I'm like reading a whole nother poem, these words are coming up for me, and I'm just like kind of more focused towards me. And it was like, okay, I want to still show my part in this, right? I don't want it to be all on her. And the more I thought about it, it's like the more the universe unraveled for me her side of the story, in a way of like how I acted, things I'd done when I was younger, things I'd done as I was growing up. You know, we had a few years where we were separated. I was living with her family, and she was trying to get her life together, find a job and all that stuff. And coming back from that, it was a whole different experience between us. There was a whole different dynamic. Suddenly she was married. Suddenly I felt almost like the second place, where previously I'd been the first. It was just me and her. And I had no resentment towards my stepfather, but like there was still this energy of feeling rejected. And at that point, I'd already had an experience with my father while I was living with my grandparents, where yes, I got to talk to him a little bit more because he's not in my life. My biological father isn't part of my life, but, you know, I had the experience of being with him, and even in that moment, just realizing like how much he doesn't know about me, how much he doesn't really seem to care to know about me. And there was this whole nother sense of rejection. And then when I had come up to the States with my mom and my stepfather, I was told that basically my grandmother in and of herself had said, like, basically, like, take your child, I don't want her anymore. So it was just all this energy of rejection, and then suddenly coming into this relationship now with my mom and my stepfather, where it was all about them, it felt like. And it was like, I'm just here, I'm existing. There are all these new rules about what I could and couldn't wear. You know, all of a sudden, like, after not being that religious, like, I went to church, you know, with family friends. Back when I was in St. Lucia, we went to a Catholic church in terms of my grandmother. And, you know, that was all I knew about Christianity. And then all of a sudden, because of like my stepfather's role, all of a sudden we were like submerged in this whole Pentecostal Christian lifestyle. And it was just like, you know, and if I have to be honest, now looking back, it felt oppressive, and it felt like these beliefs were being forced on me that I didn't necessarily have the time to delve into for myself. And if I had doubts or if I just didn't care as much, it was like looked down upon, right? Anyway, I'm going into a whole nother story. But basically, the universe held up a mirror to myself and how I had been acting and what the things I've been doing and just how difficult that must have been for my mother in and of herself to deal with as a single mom and then as a married woman. There's still the part of me that knows that it doesn't make up for anything that was said or done to me in response. Because, you know, you're still the adults in the relationship. There's still an amount of emotional regulation that you should have, or of self-control. You know, like basically seeing this level of like reactivity where it seemed like the only reaction was violence. You know, a lot of my poems that I wrote talk about how I feel like my mother doesn't really truly know me and I don't really truly know her, because that element of conversation I feel like was just so unapparent or like non-existent throughout my teenage life into adulthood, and that just made things even more strained than I think they needed to be. But basically, all of that being said, it brought a level of empathy that even deeper than I'd previously shown or realized, because it was like, you know what, I was a problem too. And I have a lot of poems in that book. The last few poems were actually a lot more empathetic in terms of like realizing the generational cycle, knowing that my mother's mother was treated the same way or had the same thing going with her life, then my mom had the same relationship with her mom, and now I have the same relationship with my mom. And also coming to terms with the realization that it's not my responsibility to try to fix the generational curse between us, because I mean, my lifestyle is the very antithesis of my mother's and her beliefs, and I have to realize that her beliefs in God and Christianity, which I don't shun, I simply have additional beliefs and practices in addition to that, but her very my family's very belief system is the antithesis of mine, and there's never going to be a level of acceptance or balance or coexistence, because for them everything that I am is demonic, and for me, I accept all things very easily. You know, the level of, I don't want to say bigotry, why is that the word that came through, the level of exclusiveness that was in that lifestyle did not really feel right to me, and I never really said anything against it, but things like not accepting people who have a different sexuality, which I actually have a different sexuality, you know, I consider myself bi, so that in and of itself, but also just this like exclusivity of people of certain religions, you know, having friends that were Muslim and then being told I couldn't hang out with them, you know, that was not okay with me. I love like so many different cultures, so many different people, so many different types of religions. I just love learning more and more about other people, and it felt like my family system wasn't like that. It was like this hierarchical system that just because my stepfather was a minister, like people had to treat them or us in a certain way. It was like we were on a pedestal, and you couldn't say or do anything that might ruin his reputation or might make people think ill of us. And it was just like always being forced to go talk to other kids or whatever, even though my silence, my separateness was like, what's the point of me, you know, interacting and trying to make friends when, one, I'm not going to be able to hang out with them ever in my life because my family was so like isolating and isolated. You know, they were very selective with who they spent time with, and I'm kind of like that now, but it's not by race or religion or anything like that. It's just by choice. Like, I'm sensitive to energy, so as long as someone is attracting to me in a positive energy, I have no problem spending a few hours with them, you know? And I don't know. I'm trying so hard to be respectful because obviously I don't think anyone's gonna find my family that easily. Especially we have no pictures. My parents aren't really online in that way, so but it's still like a level of trying to not make them look bad. But yeah, like just recognizing like I was not fucking perfect whatsoever, and that in and of itself gave me enough empathy to be like, you weren't perfect, I weren't perfect. Let's leave it at that, you know? Which I know is not easy for everyone. There will also always be, especially for people who are victims of abuse, trauma, like it's not going to be that easy to just be like, okay, I'm going to forget about it, whatever. I have the privilege of not having my family in my life and not being near them where it does trigger me. When I was in the same town as them, even after I'd moved out, but I was still working in that town, it was so triggering to think that they would be coming in. Either one of them would be coming in at any point because they did that at times, and it would just trigger the heck out of me. You know, being texted by my mom or my stepfather was triggering for me. Everything, like, it was just so triggering, and I'm glad that I was able to move away and stop all communication because everything was just triggering. So I am not going to be in this space. I'm not going to sit and pretend that like everything is perfect, that if I were to see them right now I would be completely and utterly healed and okay. But there is this like process for me of coming into a place of understanding apart from them. And on my part, it helps me when it comes to talking about them because in conversations, I'm not so quick to jump to all these negative, traumatic things that happened. I'm more willing to just talk about them neutrally, you know, like, oh, my mom's a chef, you know, she was really good at cooking. The positive things that they did, the positive places that we might have went, positive experiences are more likely to come up as opposed to the negative traumatic ones. It's not to say that, again, if I were to see them right now, I'd be completely like arms open. I'd probably just like run away. But there is a level of understanding. So I used to have another YouTube channel where I made a video about healing, and just the fact that the same thing is coming up even now, months later, it's just this realization that healing is a process. It doesn't mean that you can't get triggered. It doesn't mean that it still can't come up for you and it can't feel painful, right? It still feels painful anytime I think about my parents or anytime I think about certain experiences I had. And even thinking about my stepsisters, like hoping that they have the strength and the fortitude to get through this lifestyle living with my parents, and also being able to have a mind of their own, because as I've stated on this channel, I don't feel like I had a mind of my own until I moved out. And even then, it took a lot of unlearning for me to get to a point of knowing who I was and recognizing what I believed, because in that household it didn't feel like I was able to explore anything for myself without it being deemed demonic. Like, I love fantasy. That's been my favorite genre since I was a kid, and I know now why, but like, to have that taken away from me, where that was the very basis of me loving to read, was being able to read about other worlds and stuff. To have my mom both of them actually in high school basically tell me I can't read those books anymore. Everything just felt so restrictive in the worst ways. A lot of times there wasn't discussion. It was just, it's demonic, you know, and it's just like, what? You know, so I enjoy now having the freedom to explore things for myself, explore myself as a person, and go through journeys like this in terms of healing, of going through the ebbs and flows of feeling love and hatred towards my parents, feeling, you know, love and betrayal, feeling all the feelings and letting it come up as it needs to. A lot of times it, you know, it may come up for a day, it may come up for a week, or it may come up for a whole entire month, and then it just kind of goes away. And I just have to accept that and be okay with that, and I am. You know, being healed is kind of, it sounds like a end statement. Healing is a process. It's a continual process. It feels difficult, it feels hard, and you know, you can be healing for your entire life, you can be healing for years on end, and it doesn't feel like it stops. But I feel like each time things come up, you start to realize just how resilient you have become, just how much you have grown, just how much, like, you have a new perspective each time. And it's like, okay, this is coming up for me, but I don't feel as angry as I did before. Actually, I feel a lot more neutral towards this specific thing or this specific event, or I feel less like shame around this because I've dealt with it. I've thought about it. I've let it move through my body, move through my mind, and I've released it. And yeah. That comes to another topic that has been coming up for me. I wanted to make a separate video about it. I might still do that, but basically the idea that cycles keep coming up in our lives, not because we're in need of learning a lesson in like a punishable kind of way, but just realizing that each time a cycle comes up in your life, you are a different person. There's a different version of you that is going through that, right? And you have to be able to learn, you know, just how much you've changed between each cycle and celebrate how much you have been impacted, how much you've grown, right, between each part, and just appreciating yourself for that and celebrating that growth, celebrating that change. And a lot of times I think cycles and lessons come up to teach us more about ourselves, not necessarily to teach us about life or, you know, another person, but to teach us more about ourselves, to help us grow in new ways and appreciate ourselves in new ways as well. So that is pretty much everything I want to say. I don't know why my camera keeps dimming this time around, but I hope you enjoy the video. Please comment if you have anything that you want to add or share. I try to respond to all my comments that are respectful. And yeah, I will see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.